Welcome to another episode of Autogefühl, today with me AJ and Michelle. Before the First World War, the ridge line of the hills between Lorraine and Alsace was the border between France and Germany. A military road was constructed along the western edges of the peaks, cleverly hidden to the spying eyes from the east. Well, those days are long gone, but what has remained is one gorgeous driving road, the Route Discrete. Today, I'm going to attack this road, and my weapon of choice is the new Opel Corsa GSi. Let's find out what this car has to offer. Are you ready? Let's go! The front of the new Corsa GSi is in line with the new GSi design philosophy. That includes these dashes of chrome elements on the lower part of the bumper, as well as these carbon fiber effect plastics running across the front of the grille. The grille itself is blacked out, giving it a little bit more of that menacing look. And of course, this horizontal line, it's not an air intake, it's just a cosmetic piece, but it kind of makes the car look a lot more powerful and menacing, suggestive that there's a bigger engine under the hood. Is there? We'll find out soon enough. The car comes as standard with halogen lights. You can also get the bi-xenons as add-ons if you would like. And there are 3 different color options. This is the red. I think it's called Catch Me Red. There's also a bright mango color, and there's also a gray color. The car is 1.9 meters wide, and it weighs 1,200 kilograms. And now let's go take a look at the side. The Opel Corsa GSi is a fairly small car. First of all, it's only available as a 3-door version. It's about 4 meters long, and the wheelbase is also just 2.5 meters long. The wheels, by the way, start at 17 inches. Those come as standard, but you can also get the optional 18-inch wheels like the one we have here. And if you get the 18 inches, you can also specify the Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tires. These will enhance the cornering ability and give that little bit of extra grip. Going down the side, the rear view mirrors also have a casing which is carbon fiber-esque, in line with what we saw in the front. Now, of course, the GSi model, is not just a cosmetic upgrade. No, there's a lot of performance and handling upgrades as well. The engine, we'll come to that in a little bit, but the chassis and the handling is where they've paid a lot of attention to. This car has been developed on the Nürburgring. So first thing first, this chassis, the suspension has been dropped by 10 millimeters. It has the Combi adaptive mechanical damping system. We'll talk more about that once I'm driving. It comes with upgraded brakes, which come with that red paint on the calipers as standard. And this is the base brakes that you get on the OPC line, the erstwhile OPC line, which is no longer available. As we go further down the side, this is the very typical Corsa roofline, very swooping, very symmetrical in this way, you know, the way it swoops upwards from the front and kind of dips down in the back, gives a nice arch. Some people don't like it. What do you think? Let me know. As we go further down the side, a slim shoulder line, just to give that little bit of accentuation. The suspension, not only being stiffer and lowered, the components for the linkages as well as the axle have also been stiffened. That is, the material itself has a higher cross-section, so that provides more rigidity and strength. Although it still has torsion beam. Of course, I wasn't expecting anything otherwise. On the top, the GSi also gets the spoiler, which is more cosmetic than useful, but it's really important for a hot hatch to have a spoiler. It wouldn't be complete without one. The rear and the front get parking sensors. There is no camera in the front, but there is a camera in the rear, which you can get as options. Let's open the boot. The hatch opens very nicely. Not a lot of space. Yes, it's only about 280 liters. but you can expand that if you drop this false floor down. But with it up, you get a nice flat loading bay. Just a demonstration, this is a small cabin suitcase and that already occupies quite a bit of the space. But you can get rid of the parcel shelf like so, and then you have the ability to fold these seats down in a 60-40 fashion, like so. Let me get this one down, and of course the other one as well. And with this, I think you can fit some larger items, but of course, this being a small hot hatch, practicality is not in its top 3. Here we have the key for the Corsa GSi. Nothing special. By the way, this color is called Pull Me Over Red and not Catch Me Red, but it's more or less the same thing. Anyway, 3-door, so which means that this side door is a little bit longer, so you got to be a little bit careful in tight car parks. The door opens really wide, so it gives you really nice access to the interior. Let's take a quick look at the door. I think it's very simple, quite monotone, if I'm being honest. There's only black. These materials are pretty hard, but then again, it's a Corsa. But what's nice to see is a nice soft plush material right here. Some glossy inlay, mirror and window controls, a nice door pocket. The sound system, unfortunately, we tested today. It doesn't sound that great. If music is something that is really important for you in your car, spend some time listening to the sound system in the car and see if you're okay with this. Anyway, let's check inside the car. Being a GSi, being sporty, everything is very black except for the roof liner, so it kind of lifts the cabin a little bit, but the dashboard, the wheel and the seats are all black. The base seats are fabric, and I think that's a better option. These Recaros are optional and slightly more expensive. Plus you can do that little bit to reduce your carbon footprint and not have animal leather seats. And another thing about these seats are, by the way, there's nothing nothing electric. It's fully manual. So let's hop inside. Getting inside is fairly easy. It's a little bit of a tall boy hatchback design, so we have plenty of headroom to get inside. The seats, while I'm on the topic of the seats, this is as low as it gets, and for some reason I'm not completely happy and satisfied with the height. If this is my driving position, you know, I still have my knees upright. I would have liked it to be a little bit lower, considering this is the optional Recaro sport seats. This is, I think, a bit too high. It should have been dropped by at least 2 or 3 centimeters. But how about you come inside and let's take a closer look. The cockpit is fairly nice. The dashboard is fairly deep. You'll notice that as soon as you sit down, which means that these A-pillars are a little bit further away from you. There are these small 3/4 windows, and at first impression you would be like, okay, you know what, this is kind of obstructive to my line of sight when I'm going around corners, especially in a sporty car. But since I've been driving this car for a little bit already, it didn't seem to be that much of a problem, and we'll see if that comes up as an issue later on or if I don't really notice it. Apart from that, the top of the dashboard has a slightly better, plusher material than we saw on the doors. It's a little bit soft to touch. There's a dash of chrome design element on the top, which kind of breaks the monotony. There's also different colors and textures. For example, this piano black glossy inlay across the front. Let's take a look at the dashboard before we go to the side. 2 analog dials for the tachometer and the speedometer, which is really nice and very sporty. The menu can be changed with the button on the stock, which is a little bit fiddly to use. Perhaps I would have liked it to be kind of integrated in these buttons over here, so it could all be used to navigate through the menu, because now you have to use the stock, and to go up and down you have to use this. To the keen eye, you will notice that it says 8.6 liters for 100 kilometers, which is a lot, but as we've only been driving on the hills on the Route de Cray, I don't know if I'm ever pronouncing that right, Michelle. I think I've been saying it different every single time, but you please bear with me. Anyway, it should get better mileage. The claimed efficiency on a combined cycle is about 6.7, and I would say if you're just using it on the highway with a light throttle, you should expect something, a number as low as maybe even 5.5. Apart from that, you get your tire pressure sensor. You can also calculates the following distance in terms of seconds that would be required to stop. And it also has a traffic sign detection, front parking sensors, rear parking sensors, rear parking camera, cruise control, collision warning alert. There's also a lane keeping assist, although it's not really an assist. It's rather a alert. So if you're straying off the lane, it will just give a audible warning, no vibration, and of course also no steering intervention. Apart from that, let's talk about the infotainment system. First of all, the base Corsa GSi as standard only comes with a radio and CD player. They're without any kind of touchscreen. And I think at this price point, they should have thrown in one of them. The IntelliLink touchscreen is an optional extra for 350 euros. This navigation integrated touchscreen is 850 euros. So in the end, not that much more if you're spending 20 grand, but I think at least one of them should have been integrated as standard. You have your regular audio gallery. You can mirror your phone with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. You have a navigation which works pretty well, and some hotkey buttons. You have the OnStar concierge service for emergency as well, and it talks to you. Some hotkey buttons, parking unlock, seat heaters, steering wheel heater, an eco mode, which is basically a engine shut off when you're parking. Down here, there is the air conditioning control for the climate control system, single zone, and I think it's fairly standard. Fairly spacious glove box, which is interestingly damped, which is always nice to see. As we come towards this side, at the bottom of the central console, there is a USB charging port, and also what you would use to connect your phone to the infotainment system, power socket, a soft rubber-lined cubby hole with a cool little flap, a rubber flap, which you can just pop out, and then this would also double as a bottle holder. This is a slightly shorter throw 6-speed manual gearbox. Feels pretty good. It's still a fairly long throw. It's not as short as perhaps some of the other cars, but in this segment, for a hot hatch, I think it's fairly good, and we'll speak more about this later on. The pedals are also aluminium, so it's in combination with the gear throw, it feels quite sporty to use. Handbrake and a cubby hole down here, and some bottle holders in the back. Let's hop into the back seat. There is a latch which will tip the seat forward. You're gonna have to push it down a little bit for it to slide, but thankfully there's a little bit of a memory attachment, so after I do get inside, the seat will return to its original position. It's not the most smoothest to use. I need both hands, so hold on. But there we go. The seat was set to my driving position, and it returns to that driving position. And actually, it's not that bad. Yes, it's a little bit more cramped than a 5-door hatchback, but I have pretty decent knee room, or I would say I would have if it was somebody in the front would be able to sacrifice some of their space, but it's all right. I mean, it's just about touching the seat in the front. Because the seats are so high, which I don't really like, the plus side, though, is I have space to slide my feet under. There's an armrest on the side, a little bit of a bottle holder, cubby hole type thing down here as well for the rear passenger. Isofix anchor points for child seats. And you can also, there's a 2-stage reclining, so you can have it a little bit more vertical, or you can also recline it back. So that works for this and this. No center armrest, but there are extendable headrests. So for short drives for slightly smaller people, you know, I'm 5'8" or 1.7 meters, it is just about enough. All right, let's see what powers this little pocket rocket. Michelle, can you hold that up real quick? Thank you. So, the Corsa GSi comes with a fairly humble looking 1.4 liter inline turbo petrol engine, transversely mounted, which goes through a 6-speed manual transmission to front-wheel drive. This engine makes 150 horsepower and 220 newton meters of torque at 3,000 to 4,500 RPM. There's quite a lot to talk about this engine. For example, I can already tell you it's not so good low down, pretty good in the mid-range and not that nice on the top end, but we'll talk more about that once I'm out on the road. This car can accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 8.9 seconds, and the max speed is about 207 kilometers per hour, which is roughly, I would say, pretty much toe-to-toe with its competitors like the Fiesta ST. In fact, this is a little bit more powerful, a little bit quicker, and a little bit cheaper. So, does that make it a better car? Let's find out. Before we get up to the Route des Crêtes, we need to go on the highway. So let's test this Corsa GSi and test its behavior out on the open road. First things first, let's do an overtake. Let's see the roll-on in-gear acceleration in 6th gear from 90. Foot is flat down. There is absolutely no torque at all. I can feel it building up a little bit more. I think it's 120. And now I feel the surge of torque at 3,000 RPM. But anyway, let's talk about some of the assistance systems that you can use to make your life on the highway a little bit easier. The Corsa GSi comes with regular cruise control as an option, and you can use that through the steering wheel mounted controls like so. Setting the speed is very easy. You can adapt it as well with this roller here, and you can see on the display what speed that you have set to. It maintains the speed as you would expect as a regular cruise control. I wish though there was an adaptive cruise control. Perhaps later on it will become available as an option. Apart from that, let's talk about the stability. Unfortunately, somehow this car doesn't seem that confidence inspiring to me out on the highway at this speed. Although the car is capable of going, I think the claimed top speed is about 207 kilometers per hour or thereabouts, I don't know if that would be something you would feel confident or happy doing, because already the car feels a little bit twitchy. The steering rack, the ratio of the rack and pinion, the steering is a little bit on the sharper side, which is great for going around twisty corners, but is not so great out on the highway, where even a small correction leads to the car feeling a bit darty and very, very frantic. But on the whole, the steering has got a good weight. It's not that communicative at the speed. It feels a bit numb, as you can see around the center, but I think it's okay. I wish there was some way to have kind of a progressive steering rack wherein it would adapt to the speed, but I guess it's one segment too low for these kinds of features. Apart from that, though the suspension has been lowered by about 10 millimeters and you have the combi adaptive damper, the mechanical system, which is not an adjustable electronic damping system, it is doing a fairly good job. Around slightly more bumpy streets, you will feel the car bouncing and jiggling a little bit. It is a little bit firm. We will try to take it out on some more city-like situations, and we'll see how that behaves. But on the highway, I think the damping and the suspension is pretty good. The only complaint again would be a slightly darty steering wheel. Let's overtake this truck. Let's drop it down to 5th gear, rev match real quick. Yeah, I think I'll talk more about this engine once we get out onto that beautiful Route of the Ridges. There's a lot to say about it, good and bad, but we'll save all of that later. And coming back to highway mannerisms, sound insulation I think is pretty good, what I would expect, thanks to slightly more plush materials on the dashboard. And even though the door is pretty hard on the top, there are some softer materials lower down, so it does help the acoustic damping, as well as just feeling a lot more, a lot more composed and a lot more refined on the inside at high speeds. The tires, even though they're slightly lower profile than the regular Corsa that you would get, it doesn't lead to too much of road noise filtering in. Like for example, we just went over a bridge and the surface separations are felt and heard a little bit more, but I think that's totally okay. On the side of comfort, these seats I think are a bit hit and miss. I would just stick to the base Stoff seats in German, or the cloth seats, but these Recaro leather seats are a bit too firm, as you would expect being a sport steering seat. It has really good side bolstering, which of course we will test out once we're on the nice road, but on the highway I feel myself after just about an hour or so already twitching a little bit and feeling that it's maybe a bit too firm for my taste. But so if you're planning on considering this car instead of its rivals like the Fiesta ST, I would suggest you spend some time, see if you can get a test drive where you can go on the highway for a little bit and then see how you feel about the seat. Speaking of the seat, another thing which is a glaring characteristic, good or bad, we'll talk about that later, is the height of the seat. It's quite high. It's a tall seating position. My knee is fairly upright if I bring my heel towards myself. I don't know if, I mean, of course, this is a small hot hatch. It's really on the lower end of the food chain when it comes to hot hatches as well. You know, it's not, let these bikers go. There we go. It's not really as, it's still a bit of a smaller hot hatch. So of course you're gonna have a slightly higher seating position, but perhaps it's a bit too high. And I think I would have expected, you know, with the sports seats, especially these Recaro seats, that there would be the option of having them even lower. But no, this is as low as it gets. The plus side is on the highway, like right now, it gives really good visibility out towards the front and the side, thanks to these tall windows. And because it's a two-door, the B-pillar is behind me, so I have really good visibility at 90 degrees. The rear windshield is also fairly large, and I have a large rear view mirror. So visibility is really good, but I can already anticipate that on the twisty roads, the seating position will be something that I might not like as much. There are a lot of other assistance systems that you can get optionally. You can also get the collision alert. Now this is just an alert system. There is not, like I mentioned, a adaptive cruise control type of system, and you can set the distance that you feel would be perhaps a bit too precarious and you would want to be alerted with a click of a button. Very simple over here. You have controls for the audio, the telephony. So there's a lot of other features like rear view camera and even a front camera as well. So there's a lot of assistance systems that way. But again, in this segment of cars in this market. So not the slightly upgraded semi-autonomous esque features that you would find on a more expensive car. So on the whole, sound insulation is good. Seating position is high, which is good and bad, and depending on the situation. Steering wheel is a bit twitchy. I feel it should have had a slightly more progressive rack rather than a sharp rack, because on the highway it does feel it's a bit disconcerting. Road noise is pretty well damped. The suspension, while it has the stiffer lowered sport suspension with the combi damper, on the whole it is still very smooth on the highway. Now let's go up to the Route des Crêtes. Right at the foothills before we get up into the route of the ridges. So let's take this opportunity to understand how the Corsa GSi behaves on small bumpy city streets. As you can see right now, it is a bit jiggly. On the highway, when you're driving at a higher speed, and of course naturally highway being a highway, the pavement is a lot smoother, so you don't notice any undulations as much. But as the speed drops and the roads become a little bit bumpy, you will feel those rough edges filtering through the damping system a little bit. But I must say they've done a really good job of it nonetheless. Even though this is not an electronically adaptive damping system, it is still continuously changing itself. So it's not a set ratio or a set tuning. So that way it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Stiff when it needs to be while going around corners, and slightly more supple and a little bit more forgiving on these bumpy streets. The turning circle, as you just saw, is also really good in the city. Thanks to this really small wheelbase, this car is really at home in small, pretty little French villages such as this. I'm going to turn off the lane keeping assist now, so as we get up into the mountains, I will not have to worry about it intervening. Another thing I forgot to mention, which I noticed earlier, is the navigation screen. It's kind of obstructive in the way that it's right here below my hand. So whenever I want to see the navigation screen, I kind of have to move my arm away and peer down. And I think it's a little bit distracting. Of course, if you own the car and you drive it, within a couple of days you will get very much used to this kind of a screen. But otherwise, perhaps I would have liked it to be a little bit higher. Maybe swap the place of the air vents with the screen instead. That would have been perhaps one way of doing it. But the sharp steering wheel and the sharp responses that I complained about on the highway are also a pretty good feature for these tight city streets. As you can see, darting in and around these little alleys and avoiding these cars and squeezing in these little gaps makes it it's so much easier with this sharp steering rack. So overall, I think the Corsa is very much at home down here in the city. And now let's make our way up into the hills. Well, here we are, finally on the route of the ridges. And we're climbing up right now. We're not at the top, so this is a good way to test the hill climb capabilities of the Corsa GSi. Let's start off talking about the engine, because there's a lot to talk about, and I'm not really sure. I haven't been able to make up my mind on it, but I'm going to be objective and give you all the facts and then let you decide. So first of all, it's a Turbo 4 petrol, 1.4 liters, 150 horsepower, and makes 220 Newton meters of torque. And it's the torque comes in at 3,000 RPM and starts to plateau and tapers off after 4,500 RPM. What does this all mean? Well, let me demonstrate. The road is empty. Let's be safe. I put it in first gear, or let's see. I stall the car first, and then I put it in first gear, and then I put my foot down. Did you feel that surge, or did you hear it, or did you see my face? I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to convey that surge to you, but up till 2,500, roughly 2,800 RPM, there is a lot of turbo lag. Or maybe it's not turbo lag because I can hear the turbo whine, I can feel that, but there is not enough acceleration. So when an engine spins, a petrol engine or a diesel engine, it creates torque in varying amounts through the RPM range. So if you draw a graph, for those of you who know, sorry I'm wasting your time, but for those of you who are interested, if you draw a graph with the RPM, the speed of the engine, versus the torque, the graph usually goes up like this and tapers off. Whereas in this engine, it's designed to climb slowly, climb with a big plateau between 3,000 and 4,500 RPM, and then just kind of fade away. And that means, because power, remember, is a function of torque and RPM, it means that you get that grunt only between 3,000 and 4,500 RPM. Below that, there really is not much to play with. And over that, the engine sounds nice. They also have a temporary boost facility, which is not anything fancy. It's really just a different way of software programming. But the point is, you really want to keep it between 3,000 and 4,500 RPM. So this bandwidth is really all you have to play with and enjoy the car with. And that's, in a way, maybe not the best for me. You know, a naturally aspirated engine always gives you instant response and the power always keeps climbing. So you always want to rev it high, and it's an easy way to understand the linear power delivery. But in this car, I get power till 4,500 and there's nothing really after that. So you want to shift up a lot sooner. In the end, It's kind of good because you're not revving the engine too high, you're not spinning it so much, so you're using less fuel. It depends, the turbo engines work a little bit differently, but I wish there was a little bit more poke in the bottom end. In the city, for example, this is good because it gives you very linear control. It's very dull in a way, but in a good way, so that you're not jerking back and forth. It's not making you nod your head. So it's very smooth to drive in the city, but on the mountain roads, you really have to work the engine and just kind of keep it precisely in this gap to get the most out of it. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Next, let's talk about the gearbox. The gearbox is a 6-speed manual. That's the only option that you have available. And it's been modified a little bit than the standard to feel like a short throw gearbox. And by that I mean the throw is still fairly long. It still feels not as clean or as tight as a short throw gearbox. It doesn't have that rifle bolt action or that gated feel. It's still a bit spongy and rubbery around the edges. Wow, the road just became so much smoother. But it's still better than the standard Corsa. So they've done some work to it to make it feel and behave as a short shifter. But I would say 7 on 10. Then let's talk about the steering. The steering is coming alive now. It's starting to come alive. It felt a bit too twitchy on the highway. It felt nice in the city, but this is where it belongs. This is where the steering makes sense now. It just starts in so easily. The suspension is great at keeping the body control under check. I really like that this adaptive damper system, it's not something you have to worry about. I don't have to worry about fiddling with so many different controls and which setup is the best, getting worried about it, or just leave it. It does it on its own. It's mechanical, so it's that way it's simpler. A lot of bicyclists on this route, so safety first. I'm going to wait till I get around this bend because I can't see through it, so I should not overtake. There we go. See, a lot of motorcyclists as well. The steering, the sharp rack that it has just gives you such great feel. The feedback, great control. The feeling or the feedback is still not the best. I'm not completely satisfied with it. I want to feel a little bit more of the car. Sometimes I notice the car is torque steering, but I don't get that communication through the steering wheel, and that's quite dangerous. I want to feel what the tires are doing. It's got an open differential. There isn't even brake-based torque vectoring, so if you're planning on this car, that's something you should keep in mind. So without brake-based torque vectoring, forget any fancy LSDs, just an open diff. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of torque steer. There's going to be a little bit of wheel slip when you're going around inside corners, around corners really fast. It is a front-wheel drive car after all. So with that, the feedback of the steering wheel, I feel, should have been a little bit better. And wow, the road just opens up now. This is where the Route de Crête starts to come alive, and wow, it's very beautiful. We're going around a tight hairpin now. The pedals, these aluminum pedals, feel really nice if you know how to heel and toe, unlike I do, or rather I don't know how to heel and toe. Then they seemed like they would be really nice to do with this car. Oh wow, look at this road, it's incredible. They are pretty grippy, even though there are no rubber studs. And brake feel is also very good. The brakes are the standard that was available on the base variant of the now discontinued OPC Corsa. So already that was a great place to start. On these bumpy streets, it is getting a bit jiggly because now the suspension is working hard to keep the car under control, so it's a little bit stiffer now. And because of that, I feel these bumps a lot more prominently, and you can hear that in my voice. But yeah, I think the brake feel is really good, very progressive. Doesn't have a sharp bite, so you're not going to accidentally lock up the brakes or induce ABS. And it's a lot more progressive, and it's very confidence inspiring that way. And clutch action is also fairly light. So I think the touch points, steering, the pedals, the lever are all fairly good. Very nice to drive on these kinds of streets. The engine sound, I think, could have been a little bit better. I think they could have even used what a lot of the other competitors use and piped the sound in a little bit using a sound actor or some kind of resonator, because it doesn't seem like that at all. And because I have the air conditioning off and there's no music, I can hear it. There's a nice whistle as the turbo spools up around 3000 RPM. And the exhaust note I can hear very faintly is also quite nice. But on the whole, wow, cobblestones. But on the whole, I think the engine sound could have been made a lot more louder on the inside for me to enjoy. Forget about being loud on the outside. That's no use in that at all. I'm totally for putting sound actors inside cars because in the end it's me who wants to enjoy that sound, and I shouldn't be disruptive to my neighbors, and I wish they had put that in this instead. Sorry, as well. So I think we're going to continue on this road. Pulls really cleanly, and then there's a surge at 3000 RPM like that. That's something that I have to get used to. I'm not sure it's necessarily a bad thing. I guess you have to shift down now so that it's in 3000 RPM. The minute it drops below that, the fun also drops away. And I'm always a little bit weary that there is no torque vectoring. This being a small car with a small wheelbase, being a little bit taller as it is a small hatch, the inside front wheel will tend to lift and become really light. And if you're accelerating around a corner, then the power is just going to go to that wheel and it's definitely going to slip. And that is going to be not the nicest scenario to be in. So I wish they would maybe include that. Hopefully we will have an OPC version of the next Corsa, which is actually due sometime next year. So maybe after that version, the new generation comes out, they will introduce an OPC for that Corsa, and then there we can expect perhaps some more of these extra features. But I think overall, it's a pretty good car. Fun to drive, steering is good, perhaps could be a little bit better in terms of feedback, could sound a little bit better. The seating position, which I already complained about earlier, I think I'm okay with now. I didn't really feel too bad about it because, you know, a small hot hatch, I'm okay with having a little bit of a higher seating position. The Polo GTI that I drove earlier, you can see the video, I'll put a link in the description below, has a much lower seating position and I really enjoy that. But I think that's okay. Gearbox is okay, brakes are good, sound is okay. So overall, for this price, for this segment, the Corsa GSi, I think is not going to surprise you. It's not going to do anything beyond your expectations, but it will definitely meet them. So let's conclude today's episode of the Opel Corsa GSi. The GSi starts at around 20,000 euros. That's without any of the upgrades and the options. And as a reference, the base Corsa is only 12,000 euros. So you are paying quite a bit more. But are you getting enough for that extra 8 grand? Well, I really wish they would have already thrown in a touchscreen infotainment, at least the IntelliLink, if not the Navi integrated touchscreen. I think just the bare radio is a bit too primitive and bare for 20,000 euros for a car that's cost that much. But the chassis, I think, is very capable. Of course, for this price point, you're not going to get things like independent suspension or torque vectoring differential, but it handles really well. On the inside, space is okay, but for a 3-door, I think it's very much acceptable. While we were driving this car up in the hills on the Route de Cresse, with all the beautiful corners that we had, we were only able to achieve around 8.9 liters for 100 kilometers. So in the end, that's not too good really. But if you drive it only on the highway, you can expect numbers as low as 6. Overall, I think it's got a lot of things going for it. Some things that I didn't like are, for example, the seats, which are a bit too firm. While they hold you in place really well while going around corners, if you're going to be using it for a daily drive, it is a bit too firm, and the seating position could have been a little bit lower as well. But apart from that, I think this definitely should be on your list if you're looking out for a small, fun, hot hatch. Let me know what you guys think and put it down in the comments below, and stay tuned. I'll see you guys next time.